The stranded warrior. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before Captain Daniel Carter. His ship, the Odyssey, drifted silently, surrounded by the cold void. He had been alone for weeks, patrolling the outer rim of the galaxy, far from any human colony. It was supposed to be a routine mission. But then the signal came. A deep, pulsing sound echoed through his ship's speakers. A distress signal, unlike any he had heard before. The frequency was ancient, the voice desperate. "Help me, and I will serve you until the end of time." Daniel frowned. The word sent a chill down his spine. He tapped the ship's eye console. "Odyssey, identify the source." A mechanical voice responded. "Signal origin, unknown. Probability of life form, 87%. Caution advised." Daniel's training told him to ignore it. A strange signal in deep space. It could be a trap. Pirates, rogue eye, even alien warships could be waiting. But something about the voice felt different. "Show me the source," he commanded. The ship's screen displayed a damaged escape pod, floating lifelessly near an asteroid belt. The metal was scorched, the outer frame broken apart. No known markings, no sign of what kind of ship it came from. Daniel's fingers hovered over the controls. He could leave now, ignore it. But the voice, it had sounded like someone begging. He let out a sigh. "Fine, let's check it out." The Discovery. As Daniel guided the Odyssey closer, his ship's scanners picked up movement, a heartbeat. There was someone inside. Opening the pod, he muttered. The metal hatch creaked as it slid open, revealing a figure slumped inside. An alien. Daniel stepped back, his hand moving to his blaster. The creature inside was unlike anything he had seen before, tall, with dark metallic skin that shimmered under the ship's light. Glowing blue veins pulsed beneath its armor-like body. Its eyes, deep and golden, flickered open. The alien gasped, struggling for breath. Its wounds were severe, burn marks, torn flesh, deep cuts that leaked a strange, silver liquid. Daniel hesitated. This was dangerous. This was insane. But something in those eyes, they were not the eyes of a killer. They were the eyes of someone afraid. The alien weakly raised a trembling hand. "You saved me." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, you're lucky I came by." A weak, almost grateful smile appeared on the alien's face. Then, with great effort, it whispered, "Then I am yours." Daniel blinked. "Excuse me." The alien's voice was weak, but steady. "I am Khazur of the Vashar. I swore an oath long ago. If anyone saves my life, I will serve them until the end of time." Daniel felt a knot in his stomach. This was not what he signed up for. The danger arrives. Before Daniel could respond, alarms blared inside his ship. Warning! Multiple ships approaching. Daniel's eyes snapped to the screen. 5 warships had just appeared on the edge of the asteroid field. They were sleek, dark, and deadly, designed for one thing: hunting. Khazur coughed, forcing himself to sit up. His golden eyes darkened. "They found me." Daniel glanced at him. "Who?" Khazur's voice was grim. "The hunters." The ship's speakers crackled to life as an eerie voice filled the cockpit. "Human vessel, you have something that belongs to us. Hand over the fugitive, or be destroyed." Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't know Khazur. He didn't trust him. But something told him that these hunters were not the kind to take prisoners. He turned to Khazur. "Can you fight?" Khazur smirked, despite his injuries. "I may be dying, but I will fight for you, Captain. That is my oath." Daniel didn't know what madness he had just stepped into. But one thing was clear: he wasn't leaving without a fight. The hunter arrives. The Odyssey's alarms blared, flashing red across the cockpit. 5 warships hovered in the distance, their dark hulls reflecting the dim light of the nearest star. They moved with precision, like predators circling their prey. Daniel's fingers clenched the control panel. His heart pounded as the incoming transmission repeated in a cold, mechanical voice. "Human vessel, you have something that belongs to us. Surrender the fugitive, or be destroyed." Khazur, still slumped against the metal walls of the med bay, forced himself to sit up. His wounds still oozed faint traces of silver, but his golden eyes burned with intensity. "We must leave. Now." His voice was hoarse but firm. Daniel turned, studying the alien. "Who are they?" Khazur exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against his injured side. "They are the hunters. They are not my kind, but they serve my kind, or at least they did." Daniel's mind raced. He had only just rescued this alien, and now he was staring down a fleet of warships demanding his surrender. If he handed Khazur over, he could leave without a fight. But something told him that these weren't the kind of people who left witnesses alive. The hunters were patient. They weren't firing yet. They wanted Daniel to think he had a choice. He turned back to the controls. "Odyssey, prepare evasive maneuvers." "Acknowledged." "Warning. Enemy ships have begun locking weapons." Khazur gritted his teeth. "If you fight them, you will die." Daniel glanced at him. "Then tell me how to win." Khazur hesitated, then closed his eyes. His body began to glow. The blue veins pulsing beneath his skin grew brighter, spreading outward in intricate patterns. Daniel took a cautious step back as Khazur raised his hand. The ship's lights flickered. Daniel's stomach twisted. "What the hell are you doing?" Khazur's voice was steady. "Trust me." And then the ship moved. The Great Escape. The Odyssey lurched forward, faster than it had ever moved before. The acceleration pinned Daniel to his seat, his vision blurring. The asteroid field that had once surrounded them became a blur of motion. The warships reacted instantly. Missiles fired. Boom! The explosion rattled the ship, sending warning signs flashing across the dashboard. But somehow, impossibly, they weren't hit. Daniel gasped for breath. The ship wasn't just moving. It was weaving, dodging, twisting through space with inhuman precision. Khazur's eyes remained closed, his body glowing brighter. Daniel stared at him. "You're controlling the ship." Khazur gave a faint nod. "I am. Part of it now." Daniel had no idea what that meant, but he didn't care. The hunters were in pursuit, their warships maneuvering through the asteroid field with deadly precision. "Odyssey. Status." The eye's voice was calm, despite the chaos. "We are outrunning them, Captain. However, our energy reserves are depleting rapidly." Daniel swore. Whatever Khazur was doing, it was working. But it wouldn't last forever. The hunters weren't just any fleet. They were designed for this. They didn't chase. They herded. And Daniel suddenly realized where they were pushing him. "Damn it, they're forcing us into the void zone." The AI chimed in with a grim warning. "Void zone detected. Entering this sector will result in complete isolation from known space. Probability of survival, 4%. Khazur's eyes snapped open. "We must go." Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. "Are you insane? No one comes back from the void." Khazur locked eyes with him. "That is why they will not follow." Behind them, the warships loomed closer. The Odyssey's energy was failing. Daniel had seconds to decide. Go forward into the unknown, or stay and fight a battle he could not win. A missile detonated just behind them, sending the ship spinning. The decision was made for him. Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed the engines to full power. The Odyssey disappeared into the blackness of the void. The void zone. Darkness swallowed them whole. Everything stopped. No stars, no planets, no signals, just emptiness. Daniel's hands trembled as he adjusted the controls. The ship was still intact, but nothing outside responded. No light, no sound. Even the stars had disappeared. Khazur exhaled slowly. "We made it." Daniel shot him a glare. "Made it where?" "We're stuck in nothingness." Khazur didn't answer right away. He stood slowly, his wounds still healing, and looked toward the vast, black screen. Then he whispered, "No, we are not alone." Daniel's blood ran cold. The ship's radar had been silent. Until now. A single red dot appeared on the screen. Then another. Then hundreds. Daniel's stomach dropped. Something was waiting for them in the void. The escape through the void. Darkness. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. No stars. No planets. Not even the distant glow of a nebula. It was pure emptiness, as if the universe itself had been erased. The ship's eye was silent. The cockpit's holographic display showed only one terrifying truth. No known coordinates. No signals. No way back. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the armrests of his chair. This is bad. Behind him, Khazur stood motionless, his golden eyes fixed on the black void outside the window. His body no longer glowed, his energy drained from their desperate escape. Then, the ship's radar pinged. Daniel's breath caught. A single red dot appeared on the screen. Then another. Then, hundreds. Daniel's fingers tightened over the controls. What the hell is that? Khazur exhaled slowly. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, a quiet fear. They are the forgotten. The forgotten ones. Daniel stared at the screen. The red dots moved. Slowly, deliberately. They weren't random debris. He turned to Khazur. "I need more than a name." Khazur's expression darkened. "They are the ones who never left." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Never left." What? Khazur finally looked at him. This place. The void. Daniel's breath turned shallow. No one had ever mapped this region of space. The few who had entered never returned. Khazur continued, his voice low. There was a war, long before humans ever reached the stars. A war that should never have happened. The warriors who fought here never died. Not truly. Daniel shivered. You're telling me they're ghosts. Khazur's gaze flickered. Not ghosts. Not alive. Something. Between. The radar pinged again. The dots were closer now. Closing in. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but where? There was no clear direction, no stars to navigate by, no system to escape toward. Then, without warning, the ship shook violently. The first contact. Bang. Daniel shot forward, gripping the controls. The hull groaned under the pressure. Something had latched onto them. The ship's AI finally spoke, its voice edged with static. Warning. Unidentified force detected on the outer hull. Daniel's pulse skyrocketed. What kind of force? The answer came from outside. A shape emerged from the void. It was massive, easily twice the size of the Odyssey, its form twisting and shifting as though it were part of the darkness itself. Its surface was smooth yet cracked, pulsing with dim red veins. No engines, no lights, and no sound. Then more appeared. 1, 5, 20. They floated like dead gods, their movements slow, deliberate. And then, one of them spoke. A voice slithered into the cockpit, not through the speakers, not through sound. It was inside Daniel's head. You should not be here. Daniel's vision blurred. His head pounded. It felt like something was pushing into his mind, searching, digging. Khazur staggered backward, gripping his skull. His entire body trembled. The voice came again. You bring the betrayed one. He is marked. Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay conscious. What do you want? Silence. Then, the ship jolted. The Odyssey was moving. But Daniel wasn't controlling it. The heart of the void. The ship was being pulled. The dark figures surrounded them, guiding them through the emptiness. Daniel struggled with the controls. No response. Khazur's breathing was ragged. His hands glowed faintly, but he was too weak to fight back. Daniel turned to him. What's happening? Khazur's voice was strained. They are taking us to the center. Daniel's gut twisted. Center of what? Khazur's golden eyes flickered. The place where the war never ended. Ahead of them, the darkness shifted. And suddenly, they saw it. A planet, or what was left of one. A massive broken world, split into floating chunks of rock and metal, swirling in an eerie, silent dance. Huge structures, half machine, half organic, drifted between the debris, pulsing with faint energy. The dead planet hung in the void like a corpse with a beating heart. Daniel felt a deep primal fear take hold of him. What the hell is this place? Khazur swallowed hard. The last battlefield. The ship slowed, coming to a halt above the shattered world. And then, across the broken landscape, something stirred. From the ruins, figures began to rise. Tall, armored, ancient warriors, their bodies encased in a metallic shell that shimmered with unearthly energy. Their eyes burned red. The voice returned, heavier now. You have brought the betrayed one home. Khazur's hands curled into fists. They were supposed to be dead. Daniel stared at him. Who are they? Khazur's voice was barely above a whisper. The warriors of my people. The ones who were left behind. The ones who should not exist. Daniel's heart pounded. This was no longer about escape. They had just landed in a war that had never ended. The forgotten weapon. The Odyssey hovered in absolute silence, suspended above the shattered world. Daniel's breathing was shallow. The ruins below stretched endlessly, a graveyard of war. Gigantic broken structures jutted from the surface, their twisted forms half buried under layers of debris. Towers that had once reached the stars now lay crumbling. And among them, figures moved. Tall, armored, inhuman. Their metal bodies gleamed faintly under the dim glow of the ruined planet. Their eyes burned with red light. They were waiting, watching. And then the voice returned. You have brought the betrayed one home. Daniel tensed, glancing at Khazur. The alien warrior stood frozen, his golden eyes locked on the ancient soldiers below. His hands were clenched into fists, his breathing uneven. Daniel had seen fear before. He had been in enough battles to recognize it. But this was something else. Khazur, he said carefully. Who are they? Khazur swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. They were once my people. Daniel's stomach tightened. You mean, they're Vashar? Khazur's jaw tightened. They were. The ship shook as a powerful force pulled it downward. Daniel grabbed the controls, but they were unresponsive. Khazur exhaled sharply. They are bringing us to the heart of the battlefield. Daniel gritted his teeth. And what exactly is there? Khazur hesitated. Then, finally, he answered. The reason they want me dead. The descent into the dead city. The Odyssey descended slowly, its engines resisting the unseen force pulling it toward the ruined surface. As they neared the ground, the scale of the devastation became even clearer. Colossal war machines lay shattered, their twisted remains half buried in dust. Some were fused into the planet itself, as if melted into the very rock. Others were still intact, their gun barrels frozen mid-fire, like statues of a forgotten war. And everywhere, the silent warriors stood. Hundreds. Their armor was unlike Khazur's. Older. Heavier. Battle-worn. The red glow of their eyes flickered slightly as they turned to face the descending ship. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. A deep mechanical voice echoed across the ruined battlefield. Step forward, Khazur of the Vashar. The ship finally landed. A heavy silence filled the cockpit. Khazur exhaled. They will not wait long. If we do not go out, they will come in. Daniel unstrapped himself from the chair. Then let's not keep them waiting. Khazur gave him a sharp look. This is not your fight, Captain. Daniel met his gaze. It is now. Khazur hesitated, then nodded. A warrior's gratitude. Together, they stepped out into the ruins. The last battlefield. The air was thick, heavy with a strange static. Daniel's boots crunched against the ground. It wasn't stone. It was metal. The entire surface of the planet had been transformed during the war. The remnants of ancient machines fused into the landscape, forming a wasteland of steel and death. The warriors did not move, but their glowing eyes tracked every step Khazur took. Finally, they'd reached the center of the battlefield. And there, embedded in the ground, was the weapon. A massive, dark structure, half buried in the ruins, stretching endlessly downward. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. Daniel's breath caught. It wasn't a machine. It was something else. Khazur's hands curled into fists. His entire body was tense, as if standing here was unbearable. Daniel glanced at him. "What is that?" Khazur took a slow, steady breath. Then he spoke. "The Black Code. The weapon of the Vashar." Daniel frowned. "The what?" Khazur didn't look at him. His gaze remained locked on the massive structure. "It is not a weapon in the way you understand." He stepped forward, placing a hand on the dark surface. Immediately, the ground hummed. Daniel's skin prickled as the air became charged with energy. Khazur continued, his voice low. "The Black Code is not a bomb. It is not a gun. It is knowledge." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What kind of knowledge?" Khazur exhaled. "The kind that should not exist." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You're saying this is information?" Khazur nodded. "It is the code that built our greatest technology, the energy that made us gods, but also the thing that nearly destroyed us." Daniel's throat went dry. "Then why didn't you destroy it?" Khazur's voice was cold. "Because my people were cowards." Daniel stared at him. Khazur finally turned, his golden eyes burning. "They sealed it away instead of destroying it. And when the war ended, they left the ones who fought here, trapped, forgotten, meant to die." Daniel's breath caught. "But they didn't die." Khazur nodded grimly. "No, the Black Code kept them alive." Daniel's heart pounded. "And now they want it back." Khazur clenched his fists. "Not just them. The hunters. My people. The whole damn galaxy." Daniel exhaled sharply. This was bigger than he had imagined. The betrayed speak. The warriors finally moved. Their leader stepped forward. His armor was heavier than the others, ancient and scarred. His red eyes burned brighter than the rest. "You swore an oath, Khazur." Khazur's hands tightened. "I did." The warrior's voice was unyielding. "Then finish what we started. Destroy it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Wait. You want it gone." The warrior's red gaze shifted to him. "The Black Code is a disease. It turned us into this." He gestured to the endless rows of his kind, trapped between life and death, forgotten by the galaxy. Khazur's expression hardened. The warrior continued. "Your people never came back for us. But you did." Khazur looked at the Black Code, then at the warriors who had been left behind. Daniel watched the tension in his face. This was more than just an old war. This was personal. Finally, Khazur turned to him. "Captain, will you help me end this?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment. Then he nodded. "Let's finish it." But before they could move, the sky above them tore open. A massive warship emerged from the void. The hunters had arrived. The last stand at the edge of space. The sky split apart as the hunter's warship emerged from the void, its massive form blocking out what little light remained in this forsaken place. The ship was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. A fortress of dark metal, its surface pulsing with crimson veins, as if it were half alive. Alarms flared inside the Odyssey, warning of incoming hostiles. The red dots on the radar multiplied. Dozens, hundreds. Daniel's grip tightened around his blaster. This was not just an attack. This was an invasion. Khazur's body tensed as the ground trembled beneath them. The Black Code pulsed with an eerie glow, responding to the energy in the air. They came for it. His voice was low, filled with quiet rage. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then we can't let them have it. The warrior leading the Forgotten, his ancient armor scarred, his red eyes burning, stepped forward, raising a massive blade. "The oath remains," he said. "We fight." A deep, haunting sound filled the battlefield as the Forgotten activated their weapons. Their armor shifted, glowing with an energy long thought lost to time. For the first time in centuries, the war began again. The hunters descend. From above, dropships fell like meteors, their hulls splitting open midair, releasing waves of hunters onto the battlefield. Daniel watched in disbelief as the first wave landed. The creatures were taller than humans, armored from head to toe, their bodies infused with dark, shifting energy. Their eyes burned violet, unlike Kozur's golden ones. And they moved like predators, fast, precise, and deadly. The Forgotten charged, their ancient weapons, half-tech, half-energy, clashed with the advanced firepower of the hunters. The air exploded with light as the battle erupted in full force. Kozur ignited a pair of shimmering blades, their blue glow contrasting against the chaos. He turned to Daniel. "Stay close. Do not hesitate." Daniel nodded, gripping his blaster. He wasn't a warrior like Kozur, but he knew how to fight. A hunter rushed toward them. Daniel fired. 3 clean shots. The plasma burned against its armor, but barely slowed it down. The creature lunged, its blade humming with energy. Kozur moved like a ghost. He twisted, dodging the strike, and drove his blade straight through the hunter's chest. The creature collapsed, its violet eyes flickering before going dark. Daniel exhaled, adrenaline surging through him. 1 down, hundreds to go. Kozur smirked. "Then we'd better move fast." A desperate defense. The battle was chaos. The Forgotten fought with unyielding fury, their blades cutting through the enemy ranks. But the hunters were relentless. Daniel fired from behind cover, his blaster overheating from rapid shots. Each time a hunter fell, 2 more took its place. It was an endless wave. Kozur moved like a storm, spinning, dodging, striking. Even wounded, he fought as if he had nothing left to lose. But then, the tide shifted. From the hunter's worship, a new figure emerged. It was taller than the rest, armored in dark crimson metal. Its presence sent a cold wave of fear through the battlefield. Kozur froze. Daniel saw his expression shift. Recognition. Horror. Rage. The figure's voice was deep and distorted. "You cannot run, Kozur. This war was never over." Kozur's fists clenched. "Zithar." Daniel frowned. "Who the hell is Zithar?" Kozur's golden eyes burned. "The one who betrayed me." Zithar raised a single hand. The ground shook violently. The black code pulsed faster. Daniel felt a terrible force pulling at him, like gravity bending around his body. Kozur's voice was sharp. "He's activating it." Daniel gritted his teeth. "How do we stop him?" Kozur locked eyes with him. "We don't. We destroy it." The final stand. Kozur turned to the Forgotten warriors. "We finish this. We destroy the Black Code." The leader of the Forgotten hesitated. "If we do, we die." Kozur nodded. "Then we die free." Without another word, he lunged toward the Black Code. Zithar moved to intercept. Daniel raised his blaster and fired. The shot hit Zithar's shoulder, sending a ripple of energy through his armor. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it was enough to slow him down. Kozur reached the Black Code. His hands glowed with raw energy, merging with the pulsing structure. The air crackled as the ground split apart. Zithar roared, "You fool, you cannot control it." Kozur's face was set in stone. "I'm not trying to control it." He looked at Daniel one last time. "Take the Odyssey and leave. Now." Daniel's heart pounded. "Like hell I will." Kozur smirked. "Captain, you saved me. Now I save you." The Black Code exploded with light. Zithar lunged forward, but it was too late. Khazur vanished into the energy. The battlefield erupted. Escape from the void. Daniel barely had time to react before a wave of pure force slammed into him. He was lifted off the ground, thrown backward as the entire planet began to collapse. The forgotten warriors turned to face the hunters one last time, charging into the chaos. Daniel scrambled to his feet, racing back toward the Odyssey. The ship's AI was already prepped. Warning: immediate evacuation required. Daniel didn't hesitate. He launched the ship into the air, the engines roaring against the crumbling battlefield. As he looked down, he saw Khazur's form disappear completely within the heart of the Black Code. And then, the entire world shattered. Aftermath. The Odyssey drifted in silence beyond the void. Daniel sat in the cockpit, his hands still shaking. His ears rang from the explosion, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Khazur was gone. The Black Code was destroyed. The Forgotten, lost forever. And the hunters, scattered, leaderless, broken. Daniel exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. It was over. Or so he thought. A faint signal echoed through the ship's speakers. A voice, weak, distant, but familiar. "Captain, I am still here." Daniel's breath caught. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Khazur was alive. But what had he become? The final oath. Silence filled the cockpit of the Odyssey. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the screen. The voice was weak, distant, but unmistakable. "Captain, I am still here." A chill ran down his spine. Khazur had been swallowed by the Black Code. He had seen it happen with his own eyes. The explosion had torn through the void, consuming the battlefield, the Forgotten, the hunters, everything. And yet, he was alive. Daniel's fingers trembled as he activated the ship's scanners. The void was empty. There were no life signs, no wreckage, no debris, just endless darkness. He swallowed hard. Khazur. The signal crackled, breaking apart in static. Then, "I am different." Daniel's gut twisted. Different. A new alert flashed across his screen. An anomaly detected, just outside the ship. A disturbance in space itself. Daniel stood quickly. If Khazur was out there, he had to find him. He grabbed his sidearm and headed for the airlock. Whatever was waiting for him outside, he wasn't facing it unarmed. The return. The airlock doors slid open with a low hiss. Daniel stepped onto the outer hull of the Odyssey, his boots magnetizing against the cold metal. The void stretched endlessly before him, silent, black, infinite. Then he saw it. A shape. A figure stood at the edge of space, suspended in the darkness like it didn't belong. Its form was tall, humanoid, but wrong. It moved without movement, shifting through space like a shadow against reality. And then, golden eyes opened. Daniel's breath hitched. Khazur. But it wasn't him. Not fully. His armor was gone. His skin was no longer metal and flesh. It was something else. His body shimmered, shifting between states, neither solid nor liquid, neither energy nor matter. He was alive, but not as he had been. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Khazur, what happened to you?" Khazur floated closer, his movements eerily smooth. "I became the code." Daniel's blood ran cold. The Black Code was knowledge, power, a force that could reshape reality itself. And now, Khazur had absorbed it. The burden of power. Daniel stepped forward carefully. "Are you still you?" Khazur's golden eyes flickered. "I remember who I was. But I am also more." He raised a hand, and space itself bent. A ripple moved outward, distorting reality as though time itself had been stretched. Daniel instinctively stepped back. Khazur tilted his head. "I do not need a ship anymore. I do not need food, air. I exist outside the limits of flesh." Daniel exhaled sharply. And what does that mean? Khazur looked down at his hands, the hands that were no longer quite hands. It means I can no longer be what I was. I am something new. Daniel felt a pit form in his stomach. Khazur had been a warrior, a leader, a brother in arms. But now, he was something beyond mortal understanding. And that terrified him. The choice. Khazur slowly lowered himself onto the Odyssey's hull. For a moment, he looked almost human again. I swore an oath to you, Captain. Daniel swallowed hard. I remember. Khazur's golden eyes softened. Then I ask you, what do you want me to be? Daniel's mind reeled. Khazur wasn't just asking for orders. He was asking for purpose. The Black Code had given him power beyond anything the galaxy had seen. He could reshape entire worlds, destroy civilizations, or save them. And yet, he was still bound by that one moment when Daniel had reached out and pulled him from that wrecked escape pod. You saved me, Khazur whispered. So now I serve. Daniel clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a decision. This was history, the shadow of war. Before Daniel could speak, a warning flashed across the Odyssey's HUD. New ships detected. Daniel's heart stopped. The hunters were not finished. At least 3 warships had emerged from hyperspace, survivors from the battle. And they were looking for vengeance. Khazur turned his head, gazing at the approaching fleet. His golden eyes flared. Daniel reached for his controls. We need to get out of here. Khazur did not move. Instead, he raised his hand, and space itself screamed. The stars twisted. The warships shuddered violently, their engines flickering, their hulls cracking as an invisible force tore into them. Daniel watched in shock. Khazur wasn't fighting with weapons. He was fighting with reality itself. The lead hunter warship began to implode, its metal twisting inward, folding into itself like a dying star. Screams echoed over the comms as the hunters were ripped from existence. Daniel felt his stomach churn. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. Khazur, stop, he shouted. The alien warrior's hand hesitated. Daniel's voice hardened. This is not who you are. For a moment, Khazur said nothing. Then he slowly lowered his hand. The remaining warships, battered and broken, fled into hyperspace. Daniel exhaled. The war was over. Or at least, this battle was. What comes next? Khazur turned back to Daniel, his form flickering between what was once a warrior and what was now something far more dangerous. Captain, what am I now? Daniel looked at him for a long moment. And then, finally, he answered, You are my friend. Khazur's golden eyes flickered, and for the first time, he smiled. The Odyssey's engines hummed to life, its systems rebooting after the battle. Daniel turned to the controls. Khazur floated beside him, his presence both familiar and terrifying. Daniel knew one thing. Whatever Khazur had become, the galaxy was not ready for it. And neither was he. The Eternal Guardian. The Odyssey drifted through space, its hull scarred from the battle, but still intact. The void behind them was eerily quiet. The battlefield was gone. The Black Code was destroyed. But the war wasn't over. Not for Daniel. And not for Khazur. Daniel sat in the captain's chair, hands gripping the console, eyes fixed on the empty expanse before them. The scanners were silent. No enemies. No anomalies. But the ship didn't feel empty. He could feel Khazur's presence. Even without turning, Daniel knew he was there. Floating. Watching. Waiting. The price of power. Khazur stood at the center of the cockpit, if he could even be called that anymore. His form shifted like a mirage, flickering between his original self and something else. He no longer cast a shadow. His body was energy and thought, an extension of the universe itself. His golden eyes were distant, unfocused, as if he were seeing things far beyond the reach of the Odyssey. Daniel exhaled. You still with me? Khazur's gaze snapped back to him, his eyes locking onto Daniel's with a sharp intensity. "I am here, Captain." The words were simple, but the voice that carried them was different. Khazur had always spoken with strength, the voice of a warrior. But now, it was something else entirely. It was calm, deep, timeless. Daniel studied him. "You're not the same." Khazur's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "No, I am not." Silence stretched between them. Daniel leaned forward. "So tell me, what exactly did the Black Code do to you?" Khazur's expression darkened. He lifted his hand, or what looked like his hand. It flickered like light on water. When he clenched his fist, the space around it distorted, bending as if the laws of physics no longer applied. "It changed me," he said finally. "It is difficult to describe." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Try." Khazur hesitated. Then, with a slow breath, he spoke. "I am no longer bound by time." Daniel stiffened. "What?" Khazur turned his palm outward, and suddenly, the stars shifted. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as the Odyssey's cockpit window revealed a different view of space. The wreckage of the war, gone. The ruins of the battlefield, restored. He saw ships that had long since been destroyed soaring through the sky, warriors marching in ranks, cities standing where ruins had been moments ago. Daniel's breath caught. This wasn't a vision. He was looking at the past. Khazur lowered his hand, and reality snapped back. The battlefield was empty again, silent. Khazur's expression was calm, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I exist in all moments now, Captain. The past, the present, the possible futures." Daniel stared at him, stunned. He wasn't just alive. He wasn't even just powerful. He was something else entirely. Something beyond human comprehension. A friend, or a god. Daniel rubbed a hand down his face. "So let me get this straight. You're saying you can see everything." Khazur tilted his head slightly. "Not everything. Not yet." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Great. That makes me feel better." Khazur smirked. "It should not." Daniel let out a short laugh, but the weight of the situation was pressing down on him. "All right," he said, leaning back. "You're some kind of time-walking, reality-bending being now. What does that mean? For you? For us?" Khazur's expression grew solemn. "It means I no longer belong among mortals." Daniel felt something sink in his chest. Khazur continued, "I am untethered. I do not hunger. I do not sleep. I do not fear death. The man I was, the warrior you saved, he exists only in memory." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're still Khazur." Khazur looked at him for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Perhaps." Daniel shook his head. "No, not perhaps. You are." He jabbed a finger at him. "You're still the stubborn fool who swore an oath to me, and I'm holding you to it." Khazur's golden eyes softened. "Even if I am no longer what I was." Daniel smirked. "Especially then." For a long moment, Khazur said nothing. Then, finally, he exhaled, and the edges of his form stabilized. For the first time, he looked almost solid again, almost real. "Then I remain at your side, Captain, until the end of time. A new mission." Daniel sat back in his chair, feeling the tension in his chest ease slightly, but only slightly. Khazur was here, but he was no longer just a warrior. And the galaxy would never be the same. The hunters were broken, but not gone. The Vashar, Khazur's people, would come looking once they learned what had happened, and if they discovered what Khazur had become. Daniel exhaled. They wouldn't try to kill him this time. They would try to control him. Daniel looked at his friend. "So what do we do now?" Khazur's golden eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt the weight of eternity in his gaze. Then, Khazur smirked. "We do what we always do." Daniel grinned. "We survive." Khazur nodded. And if the galaxy comes for us? Daniel leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the controls. Then we remind them why humanity never backs down. The Odyssey's engines roared to life, burning through the cold void. Daniel and Khazur, a human and a being beyond time itself, vanished into the stars. Their mission? Survival. Their enemy? Everyone who sought to control fate. And their only rule? Never surrender, never bow, never break. The war was over, but their legend was just beginning.